All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you're watching from, and welcome again to our regular live streaming series, interview series. Today, again, we have the tremendous pleasure of having the wonderful saxophonist and composer and artist and world traveler and recording artist, the wonderful saxophonist Pete Christlieb. Pete, thanks for joining us again.
My pleasure.
We're here at the Museum of Glass in Tacoma, where we do a monthly thing here on the third Sunday of every month, always with an interview and then performance. So if this is your first time joining us, welcome. If it's not, welcome back. And I believe this is like the third or fourth interview that we've done with Pete. And it's always a pleasure because he has, if you haven't read his bio, just Google him. You'll see what I'm talking about. He has played and performed with everybody. He's a wealth of knowledge and experience and a hilarious human being all around, I should say. So today, we've covered a lot of topics already. I will try not to revisit stuff if I can. But if you want to find out more information, you can check out some of the older interviews. And also, we're going to interview Pete for about 45 minutes and then open things up for questions. So if you have questions for myself or Pete, feel free to put them in the comments as we're doing this. And we'll do our best to answer them either in real time or after the fact. And as before we get started, I should say thank you again to the Museum of Glass, KNKX, Ted Brown Music, Tacoma Creates, Titus Will Cars, the Rainier Foundation, and Edward Jones, financial consultant Rick Gray, for helping to make this possible. So, Pete, welcome again. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. I'd rather do this than weed whack my yard.
I understand.
I mean, this is getting me out of a lot of trouble.
Good. Happy to help. Well, we've covered a lot of things so far, as I mentioned in past interviews. I want to talk, since the last time we've done one of these interviews, our good friend Bill Ramsey has passed away. And with your permission, I'd like to talk about that a little bit.
Oh, I'm glad you do, because we just happened to be doing something with his grandson, Max. He's becoming quite a writer. Music, he's studying. He's got a real great scene going in San Francisco with this college that he's full scholarship, and they love the way he writes. And he had the summer off, and we got together the other day, and he wants to write something for me. And I said, well, what a perfect opportunity to do something that reflects the life and times of Bill Ramsey, because he was mostly responsible for talking me into moving up here. I mean, not just that, but the fact that all the years that I taught at the camp, at Port Townsend, before and after, I would be coming down here and playing with the Ramsey Clee Band, and we played in different places, and I seemed to be playing more jazz up here than I was at home, which is not unheard of, So that I'm looking forward to that, because I don't think we all had enough time or opportunities to reflect on the life of Bill Ramsey, and he did so many things here. I mean, you realize all the years that we were at Port Townsend, he was the contractor for the big band when we did our concerts on the weekend, and he'd bring all the guys, contract all the guys, and he was a contractor around town here too. He put a lot of things together. It seemed like everybody who came to town, like even Natalie Cole, who I did those recordings with, had to have a band put together here, and she was very surprised to see that I was there coming from L.A. We did a few concerts here, but that's what I wanted to say about Bill,
Well, and again, we want to interview and talk about you, but your guys' friendship has been for so long. And I know, for those that aren't aware, Bill Ramsey passed recently. He was a tremendous saxophonist and band leader here. And how did you first, Bill Ramsey, known as Rams, if we refer to Rams. So how did you first meet him?
Interesting. That we know each other. We have known each other. I'm not exaggerating it. I wouldn't be exaggerating if I said 50 years. Because I'm constantly reminded of how time goes by like a rocket. it seemed my birthdays are beginning to be every other week or something. It was that ridiculous, you know.
Well, I was very happy we were able to do the concert for Rams while he was still alive and show our appreciation. But it was, even though it was like, I think 3 or 4 hours, we all had a very minute amount of time to say things that we wanted to say. And I know that you have a lot to say on the matter. So I was kind of curious, how did you and Bill first meet? How did you first come to meet him?
Well, I was working in a very prominent jazz club in North Hollywood. It was a place where all the musicians congregate because it was, the location was very close to the studios that guys would be working in, and they had night sessions, and after the session they would come by there and listen to whoever's playing there jazz-wise and get a drink and hang and stuff like that. And so it was a very popular jazz club, and he happened to be in town because he traveled frequently with the Basie band. He had quite a legacy with those people because he, in his life, he had played every chair in that band. I mean, if they needed somebody, they'd call Bill. They'd call Bill. He'd even play, I think he even played at one time lead alto. But when I met him, he was a lead alto player. And then when I would come up here and play with this band, the Ramsey Cleep band, he was the lead alto player, and he handled that really well. I mean, you couldn't ask for a better lead alto player. But then he, like a lot of us, had gravitated to the baritone. And it's just something about it, you know, the baritone, being down there and being in charge of the you know, like the root of the harmony, and you know, and then I like to play bass clarinet too. But at any rate, Bill's influence, it was amazing. He wrote a lot of music, you know. He, for a guy who, you know, seemed to be really a jazz player and a band leader and all that stuff, he wrote pretty good charts. Of course, his counterpart, Milt Cleave, was a journeyman writer because I think there was a band, I guess, Boyd Rayburn, famous old band. That's where Milt wrote charts for that band. But it was amazing. He took 11-piece band, or a 10-piece band, and made it sound like a 17-piece band. You know, it's all in the harmony, you know, and everything like that, and the concept. But Bill, he showed up at Dante's, and we had a lot of fun, and we kept running into each other. And when he finally got me up here, I mean, I flew up to play with his band. After I played with this band a few times, then I realized, well, you know, there's great benefits. One of the great benefits was being able to go to the Harbor Lights and enjoy Dungeness crab. It was like
and martinis.
Oh my God! Yes, we had quite a reputation there. You know, I think we hold the record. Yeah, we had like between us about 10, 15 martinis, and they threw in the food. And then this gal who worked there, she got wise to us. She says, "I'm cutting you guys off." And so Bill knew her name, and I can't remember her name. She's a wonderful gal, but her nickname was the Martini Nazi.
Understandably so.
But in those days, you know, we were dyed-in-the-wool, you know, party guys. So it wasn't so bad. I mean, now I'd have 2 or 3 of those things and go face down.
Well, so when was the first time that Bill brought you up here to Northwest? Because I remember when I was in high school, that would be like maybe once a month. I remember seeing you come up and play with the band.
That's right. Yeah.
And it was it was really a unique situation because if you lived in Tacoma, you had Bill Ramsey, who's a strong influence on the saxophone.
Yeah.
You had you know, and for I know, you know, I can speak on behalf of myself, and I know if I said like Cliff Cologne or Steve Tressler or Tracy Knope, we all have the utmost respect for you guys and your musicality. So when was the first year that you first came up and started playing?
Well, it would have to be close to the time that he got me. I think he put the bug in Bud's ear, but Bud Shank was the catalyst because I had worked with Bud, and Bud's best friend was Bob Cooper, who was my teacher.
And you're talking about
and
now.
Bud's jazz camp. Bud was was Centrum's leader, jazz leader, and had a wonderful way with the whole thing. I think because he hired the right people and he just stayed out of the way and let them do their job, and everything worked like clockwork, and all he would do would go around and just sit in on our classes and see what we're doing and then move on. And we had quite an array of great players. I had another system. I didn't diagnostically run a class with the kids. I made you guys play, and I
remember.
I mean, it was more fun to see the progress when you just give a little bit of hope and instruction to somebody who's kind of confused about the whole thing and kind of simplify it, you know, because I think one of the things was self-consciousness. I'd go around on the way to classes or whatever, and people in the practice room were just going away like, man, like great, and then you get them up and make them play in front of the class, and they clam up, you know. And I remember what I told you guys is, well, you know, you realize you've chosen a life of musicianship where you will be performing live in front of people, and sooner or later, you've got like a baseball pitcher, tune the crowd out and throw the ball, you know, and you know, the other things that go hand in hand are simplicity, common sense about playing in tune, not getting too busy with it, rather than take a tune on as the tune it was written and play the changes, play the melody, and understand that when this tune was written, it was written, most of them were written around lyrics. You know, the emphasis of the tune was with the lyrics of the tune. So some people got really serious about it. I think, you remember Lee Konitz came up here and he was making people sing the song, you know, which was okay. And the guy I work with in LA, who was wonderful, very, very, very well-known pianist, who was one of the great vocal accompanist, which is an art form in itself, you know. So his name was Lou Levy, and he would stop if we were playing together, and I wasn't playing the tune right. He would stop and let me know, you know, if you're not going to play the tune, then you know, pack up, you know, shove off. So I got a respect for it, you know. And the other thing is listening to people play. Didn't you do that? I mean, I listened to so many people when I first started out. It was a way for me to be able to put a violin in a case and never look back. Not that I don't appreciate it for what it was. I still think of the greatest violinists in the world and hear them play, and it gives me goosebumps. But the overcoming experience of listening to jazz for the first time, it was a record that they had left in the house, and it was Jerry Mulligan and Chet Baker and a couple of guys who a guy named Carson Smith, whose brother was Putter Smith, who played in my band, and I played with Carson a few times, and then Larry Bunker, who was a drummer at that time, became one of the premier percussionists in the studios and made a great living playing all the things you could put in a trap case, like bells and ratchets and, slide whistle, block, snare drum, bells. Then he became a great vibe player. And you hear him on a lot of albums playing the vibes, and behind vocals and things like that. So I did manage to meet Jerry Mulligan when my folks took me to see him play. And I couldn't get in the joint. It was a fancy joint on the Sunset Strip where he and Art Farmer were playing, and I went in there and I heard him playing, and I walked up to him. He was about 9 feet tall. I was like this. I said, "Hi," I said, "You're wearing the same shirt you were on this album cover about 3 years ago." And he looked at me. He says, which is silly, but he was he was very nice to me, and they don't have to be. I mean, I've had experiences where people were not very nice, like W.C. Fields, "Go away, you bother me," hey, But I had the misfortune of traveling with Chet Baker, and I say that with a huge grain of salt because he was he would play, he didn't read, not a note. He learned everything right here, He was the greatest ear guy, and he if he got an idea, I heard him play a whole chorus in one breath. A whole chorus in one breath, because the idea was there, and he didn't have time to take a breath. He was going to complete this idea, and he got there, And his lyricism was a great lesson. I mean, I'd have to choke down all the bitterness about being left in the lurch. He took all the money and split and left us all hanging in Colorado. I had to call money for home. Like, "How's the career going, son?" "I need money to get home, So I say, I made up a tune in my head called "You're Nobody Until Chet Baker Owes You." Yeah. Same changes, different lyrics.
Of course, yes.
So if you're going to go out with a junkie, this is in the book, the book of things. Get your money before you leave town, because you're not going to see it.
Well, I'm curious, and I remember one time it was in college, and we did one of these jazz at sea cruises, and Red Holloway was on the boat, and I knew that
I love Red Holloway.
Yeah,
He's
super
great
nice
guy.
And I
He
remember,
can play, man. He really plays.
I remember going up, and he was very generous with his time and answer. I barraged him with questions because I know that he had that duo band with Sonny Stitt, who was one of my favorites. Man. And so I was asking him.
He was hanging on for life.
Yeah.
Man, that's like,
Yeah.
It's heavy. It's real heavy when you playing with that guy.
Yeah, and so I remember asking him, like, what was Sonny Stitt's practice routine like? And he said he had a couple hours every day that he went through a regular routine, and this is kind of stuff that he did. I'm curious, with you being on the road with Chet Baker, did he have any sort of practice routine, or was it more of like a savant type of thing, or what was his protocol?
I think the way his lifestyle was, he was lucky to be able to get his horn out and get on the bandstand. That was a miracle, because he treated himself really bad. And I'm surprised that he lived as long as he did, because heroin is brutal, and Dexter Gordon had the same problem, but he was almost 7 feet tall, and it took a lot longer for him to go, like several years.
This reminds me of a story about Bud Shank's Jazz Festival, which you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
I guess he was a guest artist up there one time, and
Dex?
yes, and Rams was telling me a story about you guys peeked around the corner, and there were all the students there, and he was just trying to keep balance and not fall over. Do you remember this story?
Oh, you tell me, because he said somebody asked him a question, and what did he say? He didn't. He took about 3 minutes to go, and then what did he say? Something very basic, concept. 5 minutes, and well, how do you do this? How do you do that? Just a concept, and that was it. That was the answer, So
Profound in its simplicity.
I shook his hand once, and I tell you, I thought I would never get it back. This guy's hands were this big, and he could, oh boy, he could do some serious damage, And,
Well, speaking of concept, your teacher on the saxophone, Bob Cooper, was a very profound saxophonist and influence on many people.
Who went through a lot of changes. I know that just by, step back and look at this painting, he was Lester Young, who, if he had lived this long, would have gravitated to a lot more complex choral activity, different harmonic structure, something a little bit more busy, and influenced by a lot of busy saxophone players, But I'll tell you what it was. It's just, the truth of it was that he played so very logically and very, very melodically. And it wasn't till we had played together a long time, because he lived down the street from me, and he was taking lessons on reed making from my father, he wrote the book on reed making because of his bassoon career, and he taught Bob how to make his oboe reeds. And that's you have to make, if you want to play the instrument, you have to make your own reed. That stopped a lot of people. Sure.
Did you ever learn how to make saxophone reeds from your dad, or did he do that?
No. He just went with me to the store. No, this is true. He went to meet with me to the store, and he'd have him put the reeds out there, and he'd look at the cane. Wow. He'd say, when a guy spends 3 days making one reed, he's not going to make it out of a piece of junk. He's going to look at the best cane he can find, and he knows it's not going to waterlog on you and die. Yeah. And most of us saxophone players have had the experience where you buy a reed that came from France, because most of the cane came from France. Now they're coming from other places, but the bulk of good cane was coming from France, because that's where the cane fields were, where the soil was just right and the atmosphere was just right to grow that kind of cane to make a saxophone reed. But the seriousness of taking the cane off the stalk and putting it in sacks like tobacco and putting it in a barn and let it cure. Yeah. Let it cure for as long as, like a few years, a couple of years. Wow. They had enough cane, so this stack that's been in this barn for a couple of years, the molecular structure dries out, and all of a sudden it's like this instead of like this. So there's no room for the water to get in. Yeah. And it lasts longer, and it vibrates better. It's a piece of wood, not a sponge, Yeah.
Yeah.
So Those were lessons. And then, as you know, I mean, one of my dad's colleagues was a gentleman named Herman Hansen, who used to come over to our house, and Dad and him and stay up all night and toast and boom and yak and laugh and have a good time. But Herman designed all my father's reed-making machinery, and it's very complicated, and it has a lot to do with industrial diamonds. Industrial diamond cutter is what cuts the reed. The texture of the reed is very fine, and that diamond does the job. And this machine's making a bassoon reed is it's not unlike a saxophone reed, where it starts here and it tapers up to the actual reed part. But it's a machine that, because a blank double reed, but bassoon reed, looks like a reed, but it's fanned out like this. Here's left side, right side, and in the center, it looks like a saxophone reed. Then when it's gouged and cut to a certain thickness to the center, where it's very thin, like a saxophone reed, you put a parting line there, right, in the direct center, and then you turn the reed like this, and now it looks like a reed. You cut the end off, and you wrap the reed around the end that goes on the mouth, on the neck, which is called a bocal for those instruments. And most people used to wrap it with thread like that. My dad he was revolutionary. He would take my plastic toys and put them in a jar of acetone, and it would melt into an emulsified plastic goo. Kind of looks like a lava lamp or something like that. But you take that stuff and put it in a thing, and you dip the reed in it, and it seals it like that. Where's my fire engine? Well, I don't know. How the hell I can't keep track of your toys.
If he misbehaved, he'd do it in front of you.
Bright red.
And it said FD 109.
Yeah, right. You know. So those were experiences, but Bob, he eventually gave up on playing oboe and jazz. But our mentor and all-around great guy, Bud Shank, was one of the first of all to bring flute into jazz. So the flute stayed. Oboe didn't. It was too labor-intensive. And it didn't swing very hard.
There's an album, I can't remember the name of it, but there's someone's playing oboe and I think flute. But I think Bud Shank is on this. Do you know about this album?
Right.
Yeah, I think you can find it on YouTube. But interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I can think back to all of the different folks that I've had conversations or lessons with, and I learned this concept here, and I learned this concept here. If you were thinking about to the time that you spent with Bob, are there any takeaway concepts that you think these are something that really important that I learned from him while I was spending time with him?
Well, first of all, it was like getting in the right frame of mind. You know, line yourself up and make it easier on yourself to not, you know. I always start people on, I want you to take this melody and I want you to germinate off this melody, and so it will give you the responsibility of being harmonically in the right place where the changes are going. I always start and think about the root of where you're going. Remember in class we used to take turns playing. I made people take turns playing with each other. Remember, I'd have one guy, I say, you be the bass player, and you play I want to hear the chords, you be the bass player. You're playing a bass line here, and your partner's going to be blowing over the top, and then when you get to this point, you switch places, okay? But that gives you a kind of air of responsibility to be in the right place, and it helps people get closer to the. It takes time. I mean, it's always going to take time because a lot of times your ideas get in the way of the truth.
More so today, it seems.
You know. So Bob was, you know, he had, when he started, he played one of those white Brillhart mouthpieces. I met old man Brillhart, and he was a self-made man. He was an innovator. He made mouthpieces. Charlie Parker played one of his mouthpieces. Stan Getz played one of his mouthpieces. Everybody was playing it. And then there was a guy came along later and started making metal mouthpieces. His name was Bob Dukoff, and he influenced a lot of people. I think the metal mouthpiece might have, as silly as it might sound, might have been developed and utilized to help the saxophone players hear themselves with the brass section blowing, trying to blow their ears off behind them. You know, with more volume. You know, in my experience, when I was on Woody's band, I took the book out for the first time, and all the notes were kind of dripped down they were falling to the bottom of the page, because the trombone player's spit valves were right over you, and it was getting the paper wet, and all the notes were falling off the paper. Well, it helped to have heard the records, you know. Anyway, that's a whole nother, that's a book of itself, you know. All I can remember was telling Woody that he still owed me $300. It was on the Tonight Show. Woody was in a wheelchair and fighting, and after all these years of being on a bus and playing in Woodchopper's Ball and all that, he was in a wheelchair, and people were wishing him. They got all the guys in our band, the Tonight Show band. There was 5 or 6 guys who had been on the band. Eddie Shaughnessy, one of the trombone players, myself, and the Condoli brothers, Pete, and they were on the band. So they were going. They put a microphone on. It was Jake Hanna brought everybody together, and they put a microphone. We were making a card, a cassette, you know, a sound recording greeting card for Get Well Woody. And they started from the Condoli brothers and said, "Hi, I was in the 49, and I want you to get better. And you know my brother Count, he was on the band in 51, and then we go to the next guy, and then all these guys, and they get to me, and I say, hi, Woody. I said, you can't die, you son of a bitch. You still owe me $300. And the place went nuts, and Johnny Carson came in, people were laughing, and Johnny came out of the dressing room with his makeup thing on, and what's so funny, you know? But they gave it to Woody, and he fell out of the chair. I heard, but he loved that.
Did you get your money?
Never. Never. Anyway, he had a manager that was a crook and did things that was horrendous. He actually sold Woody's house when he was out on the road, and Woody came home, and somebody else answered the door, and he says, what are you doing here? He says, well, this is my house. No, it's my house. You know, that guy ended up in prison because he never paid any taxes. He took the money from Woody, but he never paid any taxes. So the IRS came after Woody, and wouldn't you know, Frank Sinatra came in, stepped in, and what do you need? Well, about $250,000. He had that much in his pocket, you know, in big bills, you know. Here, go away, leave him alone, you know.
Did he get a receipt? That's the question.
That I don't know, but I don't think he cared. You know. Anyway, so Bob Cooper he and Bud were on Kenton's band together. Okay? So, I never, you know, I played on a few different bands. I ended up, I actually did a stint with the Tex Beneke band, and that was one of the records that I had, that it was right next to the record with Jerry Mulligan, Chet Baker, was Tex Beneke and the Modern Airs, and he had a big sound. Tex had a kind of a Coleman Hawkins kind of growly sound and everything, and he played, his jazz solos were really, really great. But when I went out with the band, and he played the same solo every night, because a lot of people don't realize that when all this was happening in the 40s, is just, if you made a solo on the record, people want to hear that solo.
It's like Ben Webster's Cottontail. There's that famous solo.
Oh, yeah.
I remember this was a epiphany that I had. I was transcribing a Wardell Gray. It was a thing that he did called Blue Gray, which is his melody on top of Blue Moon. And I remember it was a CD, and they had all these outtakes. And I started listening to all the outtakes, and he played the same thing in the same spot every time. And I realized, oh, he's worked this out, and he plays it the same way on every recording, which I thought was interesting.
It was a way of life for us. It better be good, because you're going to have to live with it. You know.
Did you ever get an opportunity to meet Wardell Gray and play with Wardell at all?
No. I think he was, but the time I got, you know, out of the high school thing and my first band, he was already gone. I think he was in, wasn't he in Las Vegas for a while or something? I
heard, and I think Red Kelly was telling me that he basically got things going on with a mobster's girlfriend, and that was kind of the end.
They did him in. There's a lesson there somewhere.
many life lessons. Many life lessons. Yes. Well, okay. So I see that we have a question from the audience. Yes. We have discussed Chet Baker both a little bit in this interview already, and the fact that he still owes Pete money, and we did discuss that in one of the other interviews at length too. Pete did not mention in this interview that there are recordings of Pete and Chet Baker and quartet, correct?
Yeah, it was actually it was a quintet, trumpet and tenor, and the three guys behind me. One guy was Dave McKay, and Dave McKay was blind, and Chet, he would get going and he'd turn around, we're rehearsing something, and he would say to Dave, don't you see what we're trying to do here? And Dave would just fall on the floor and laugh, you know. And anyway, his name was Harry Kivas, Harry Kivas Jr. And Harry was a very interesting man. He was a very high up Air Force officer. Like he had flown jets and things like that, but he was a computer expert and helped design that big board in Colorado in the mountain. They called what they call that thing, you know, where they went in there, and the big board was the world for the military, and he helped design that thing, you know, and it was supposed to be indestructible under granite rock, a mile underground, and all that. And then he'd come out and play jazz. And he played jazz all over the world when he was traveling with the Air Force and stuff like that. So he played with a lot of people, but he had an amazing, he played great. It was fun to play with the guy. You could tell he was influenced by a lot of swinging drummers, you know.
Well, so with this recording, do you have plans of releasing this stuff with you and Chet?
I lost track of some of the tapes. We only have one, and there's not enough there to make an album. You know. At any rate, the experience was. It took me a long time to realize how influential the idea of his playing, being in, like all the other players. I was influenced by, you know, people say, well, who was your greatest influence? And I think it's important to be, maybe I was influenced just as much by Bill Evans, his romantic and harmonic style that really caught my ear. You know, and then there was some great bass players that caught my, you know, because of their facility, but the notes they played, and how they approached this thing, you know, especially when you're playing a tune, you know, and a bass player's behind you, they're locked in. So it's an amazing feat for them to create another harmonic, you know, another note in that chord to go to make it not sound repetitious, you know. And that, I think that alone is what spawned the bass player technique to get so amazingly, you know, like overpowering with the facility that guys have on the bass. I had a bass player friend who played like that, and I mean, he got so good. We had to fight for, you know, like I turned around and said, what we both need is a bass player, you know, because he never playing the line. Now he's up here, you know, going crazy because he could. Why are you doing that? I can, you know. A lot of guys can't, you know. I worked with, you know, when I worked at the Lighthouse, Howard Rumsey was the leader, and he was kind of he wasn't that great, but he was there, and it was his gig, you know. So he was great, you know. Hey, oh. But he was a wonderful man, and when he was in his 80s or 90s, he kept coming to the concerts, and I kept hanging out with him, and he was like another second father to me. He gave me my first job at the Lighthouse when Bob was my teacher, so he got a gig at NBC doing the Dean Martin show, which went for several years, and obviously the gig at the Lighthouse paid $35 a night, and the other one's about $400, you know. So I got to be a Lighthouse All-Star on Thursday nights or Wednesday and Thursday or something like that, because the weekends they were always reserved for the guys who were coming in, the headliners who were coming in, and a lot of them were for like, that's how I got to meet Freddie Hubbard. And Sonny Chris, and would you believe I ended up working with both of them. I played at concerts in Holland with Freddie, and I still think in his prime, he would be the most remarkable, great trumpet player I ever heard in my life. And Sonny Chris, he had an album, and I ended up playing on his album. I played, I think I played tenor and baritone or something like that. I didn't get to blow on it because it was his album, but it was fun to be working. You know, I was so young. I mean, the studio date was something unique, you know. And Freddie, it was another scene like that. He was leaving the Creed Taylor kind of thing, which was having him play mostly rock influenced. It's moved out of the jazz idiom and into everything had a hip hop rock kind of beat to it, and double time rock kind of stuff, and he did it for a while, and it sold records, but his heart wasn't in it, and he finally quit. And I think Creed Taylor was so mad. He told me this. I remember that he told me, Creed, when I left him, he was so mad. He gave Wynton Marsalis more money than he ever gave me to do an album, just to bug me. Which sounds about true, you know. But this album was like, I'm back. It was Junior Cook and who's another tenor player that, there's so many, there's Hank Mobley, there's Junior Cook, there was a journeyman, guys who were on all the records, the Blue Note records, who were, man, and they were like, a lot of those guys were on more records, and, they were with every other group that was recording. He's on that album too, And anyway, that's how the Lighthouse gig was. It's wild that I reflect back to the fact that a lot of people that I grew up listening to, I ended up getting to play with. I never played with Jerry Mulligan. Dizzy Gillespie? Yeah, I was a youngster in a band, and he came and sat in with the band.
I've heard this story. I can't remember if we've done this in another interview, but it was more about there was a black gentleman and yourself, and he said that.
Well, that was Louis Belson.
Oh, excuse me. Okay, can you tell the story?
That was that was one of the first. That was the first gig that I had been asked to play with Woody's band, because I was in. It was one of those things where there was anything going on. I got off the road, and I got a call to, to do this thing. It was a gig in Vegas, and I was on a band, and Buddy Childers was the trumpet player, and he had been on Woody's band, so he said, well, Woody's down the street. I'm going on the break. He went down there, and he came back from the break, and he said, the gig was, Della Reese was singing, and standing next to me was Jimmy Forrest. Man, what a great cat. And you know that he's credited, he should be credited, he wrote Night Train. Okay. That was his idea. Okay. I think somebody else took and ran with it and left him going, what happened?
It's a Miles Davis affair.
To cut a long story short, I got the call, and I when I got back to L.A., I went right over to this club. It was in West Hollywood called the Shea, and they had just opened, as clubs open and close on the back, like jazz stations close. They open and they close, just like this. Jazz now. But it was open for a while, and the first band was Buddy's band, and then I was with Woody in the second band, and I was playing that jazz chair. And I had all the records, so I just jump up and play. And the gentleman sitting next to me, his name was Al Gibbons. And Al, for a black guy, was the only black guy I ever saw who could make you think that it was Stan Getz playing. He was influenced by Stan Getz. And so he was playing like, he'd sound like Stan Getz. And I was influenced by Gene Ammons and guys like that, growl and make a lot of noise. And man, they used to say, get in there and make it stink. Well, that was my approach. And here's Stan Getz, and here I am. So first night, of course, Leonard Feather would show up on the first night when nobody's sure about what they're going to do, and then he'd write the story about this night instead of the night that where it really gelled, you know. And so here's Louis Bellson and Dizzy sitting right in front of me. Yeah. So I didn't think much of it because I was having a ball doing this thing that I thought, because they said, we're going to Europe. And so I said, well, you know, it's wonderful. I went and got my passport and my vaccination and everything, because we were only supposed to be here for like 2 weeks or something like that. And at the end of the first week, or at the end of the gig, we were supposed to get paid, and the manager split with the money. And you know, I said, where's my $300? It was supposed to be, you know, like the old days. Everything was $150 a week, no matter what, you know. So I never got the money, and what he says, go see my manager, and he'd split. So I was left, you know, twisting in the wind there, and but the one thing that happened that last night was I thought I was going to Europe. And but he says, well, you know, we're going to Europe tomorrow. He said, but you're not going. And you know, da was a minor chord, a big minor, and I says, he says, well, Sal Nistico wants to come back on the band. You know, Sal was a dynamo, and he could play I Got Rhythm as faster than anybody I ever heard in my life, you know. And good, too. And he said Sal went back on the band. So that was it for me, you know. So I'm and then I'm at home, and I get a call, and it's Louis Bellson's manager. He says, so Louis wants you to come down and play. And I went there, and it was Louis' band. They were getting ready to go do a tour or something like that. And he says, I thought you were, he said to me, I thought you were with Woody. And he says, you know, a funny thing happened when I was there with Dizzy. Dizzy leaned over to me, and he says, how come the black guy sounds like a white guy and the white guy sounds like a black guy? That was the story about that, you know. But then we went out with Lou, and that's a whole other thing. The Louis Bellson Pearl Bailey thing. It was.
Well, before we get into this, and I hate to have to do this because we're almost have to wrap up.
Yeah, we should.
So, and we'll definitely have to do more of these because I know there's so many more stories and information to grab. Huh?
When they got to Europe, Sal got off the plane and disappeared.
Of course he did. Yes.
Of course he did. He never saw him. So I'm going, ha ha.
Really quickly, do we have any comments or any questions online from anybody that we're not attending to? Okay, cool. Talk about the Tonight Show. I know. I think this is the third or fourth interview that we've done, and I know we've discussed that. But I know that we will definitely do this again because there's way more stuff to talk about. But I want to make sure we have plenty of time to sound check and all the rest of that kind of stuff. So for those of you watching, thank you. Hope you've enjoyed the interview. If you have more questions, feel free to put them in the comments, and we'll get to them after the fact. Pete, as usual, it's always a pleasure having you here to share your experiences and your knowledge about all this kind of good stuff and sense of humor and wit. So thank you for joining us.
All I can say, but what was the question?
Yeah, to play or not to play?
Play.
Yeah. All right. Well, again, thank you so much to our sponsors. Thank you so much for those of you joining us online for the live stream series, or if you're here in person. And again, we do this the third Sunday of every month here at the Museum of Glass. It's a pleasure to do it. If you find value in these live streams and interviews, please feel free to make a donation either via Venmo or PayPal, or in person if you're here. And we're going to take a short break here, get reconfigured, and then do the concert, and that will also be live streamed in about an hour. So stick around. Thank you for joining us.